Welcome to the Savvy Leader Podcast. I'm Kristin, and I'm here to challenge how you think, lead, and show up. Because this isn't about surface level success. This is about clarity, alignment, and making decisions that actually move your life forward. If you're ready to stop performing and start leading with real intention, then you are in the right place, my friends. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Savvy Leader Podcast. I'm Kristin Gallatin, creator of the True North Navigation Method, and every week we have conversations right here designed to help you create more clarity, alignment, and direction in your leadership, your work, your business, and even your life. This month, we've spent a lot of time talking about freedom and flexibility, and today I want to challenge what freedom actually means by expanding on what we talked about last week. Because for years, I thought freedom just meant a different job. I thought maybe freedom meant entrepreneurship. And then I thought, well, maybe it just means working for myself. Later, of course, I thought it meant living on the road full time in an RV. And I've discovered something so much deeper than that. Freedom isn't about where you work. It isn't about your schedule. It isn't about your paycheck. Real freedom begins when your life reflects your values. And that's what today's conversation is really about. Have you ever reached the end of a really productive day, crossed everything off your list, answered every email, attended every meeting, solved every problem as if there could possibly be such a day? Maybe you even received some praise from your boss, and then you got home, poured yourself a glass of wine, you sank into the couch, and you thought, why don't I feel like I really accomplished anything today? It's such a strange feeling because from the outside, everything looks successful. People respect you. Your career, rock solid. You're responsible, dependable, incredibly productive. Maybe you even built the life everyone told you to build. But internally, something feels completely off and you just can't quite explain it. You don't even have the language for it. You just know something isn't right anymore. I know that feeling too because I've lived with it myself. Years ago, I reached a point in my corporate career where I wasn't questioning whether I could do the work. I knew I could, and I knew that I was good at it. My skills fit, my experience was there, the title, all of it. The promotions made sense, and everything looked right on paper, but my values, that's what was wrong. My values no longer fit. And that realization didn't happen overnight. It took years, years of ignoring those little warning signs, years of convincing myself maybe I should just be grateful for what I have. Years of believing that if I just reached the next promotion or made a little more money or finally got that recognition, I'd eventually feel content, maybe even a little bit fulfilled. The bar, you guys, was pretty low at this point. But I didn't, which is why today I want to talk about something that I wish someone, maybe a mentor, maybe just someone a little further down the road than I was, had taken the time to explain to me years earlier. How do you know when your work is no longer aligned with who you've become? Because here's what I believe. Most people don't suddenly wake up burned out. Burnout is rarely the beginning of the story. It's usually the ending. Misalignment, that's what comes first. Burnout is simply the bill that eventually comes due. We don't burn out because we work hard. We are incredibly capable. We can stretch, we can sacrifice, we can carry enormous responsibility. But eventually, working hard for things that no longer matter to us or working hard to fulfill someone else's expectations begins to cost us something. Sometimes we're building someone else's dream or protecting someone else's priorities. Sometimes we're climbing a ladder we never stopped long enough to ask if we even wanted to be on it in the first place. Looking back now, I can see the signs, every one of them. At the time, though, they seemed disconnected. Looking back, they formed a definite pattern. I see that now. Maybe you'll recognize some of these in yourself, not because you're failing, and certainly not because you're weak, but because maybe, just maybe, you too have outgrown the version of yourself that once fit. And that's okay. In fact, it might be the beginning of something so much better. Looking back now, it's amazing how obvious the clues seem. At the time, they didn't feel like clues, you guys. They just felt like life. I blamed stress. I blamed busy seasons. I blamed difficult leaders. I blamed my schedule. I blamed myself. I thought maybe I just needed another vacation or another drink, maybe another certification, maybe another promotion, maybe another company. How about just another opportunity? I kept believing that if I could just change something outside of me, I'd finally feel different on the inside. Have you ever done that? Maybe you've caught yourself thinking something like, ah, if I just had a better boss, or if I just made another 40K, or if I could just get through this season, just this season, or if I could finally earn that promotion, then everything would feel better. And then sometimes it does, at least for a little while. But eventually that same unsettled feeling quietly returns. Why? Because misalignment isn't an external problem. It's an internal one. You can't outrun it. You cannot outwork it. You certainly cannot outachieve it. Eventually, it catches up with all of us. And for me, it showed up in about 5 different ways. Maybe you'll recognize yourself in one of these, maybe a few. If you do, please don't judge. Just notice, because awareness is where the change begins. The first sign for me wasn't in my career, it was in my body. I was making some really, really unhealthy choices. I was stress eating until the stress got to be so great that I stopped eating. Then I was stress drinking. You probably know that one. Not because I was celebrating, though, mind you, but because I was trying to recover from life. My sleep suffered. Exercise, totally optional, and then eventually non existent at all. I was constantly tired, not sleepy. There is a difference. I was emotionally exhausted, mentally exhausted, spiritually exhausted. Here's the interesting thing. From the outside, I was functioning just fine. I was showing up, getting results, meeting expectations, and most people had absolutely no idea because high performers are really, really good at looking really, really good. But on the inside, my energy was wiped. My well was dry, not because I lacked discipline. Oh, hell no. Not because I didn't know how to take care of myself, but because I had spent years pouring myself, everything I had, into something that no longer gave anything back. And that's when I realized something. Sometimes unhealthy habits aren't the problem, they're the symptom. Oftentimes, it's our attempt to fill an empty space or numb a quiet discomfort that we've been ignoring for far too long. Your body has an incredible way of telling you the truth long before your mind is willing to admit it. It whispers before it screams. Things like fatigue and irritability, poor sleep, constant tension. Those aren't medical problems. Sometimes they're directional problems. Your body is asking you, How much longer can we keep pretending that this is working? I wish someone had asked me that question a long time ago. I think I would have been completely honest because I would have said, I don't know, because I didn't know. And maybe that's where you are today. You just don't know. You don't know what's wrong. You don't know what comes next. You just know that this doesn't feel sustainable anymore. And if that's you, you're not alone. More importantly, you're not broken. You're becoming aware as a big difference. And once my energy started disappearing, I thought the answer was to become even more productive. Yeah, I did. To work harder, to prove myself even more, and then to become, of course, indispensable. Which brings me to the second sign. The second sign is one that I think so many professionals experience, but very few talk about. You finish every task, but somehow you never feel finished. Have you ever had one of those days where you worked nonstop? You answered every email, solved all the problems all day long, checked every box. People thanked you, the boss was happy, and you drove home thinking to yourself, wow, what a busy day. And yet, instead of feeling accomplished, you felt empty and yet still reaching even. Why? Because productivity without purpose is exhausting. The to-do list never ends because you're climbing a mountain you never actually chose. In fact, the better you become, the more work that people trust you with. Has anyone noticed that yet? You become dependable, so they give you more. You become efficient, so they give you bigger projects. You become the problem solver, so eventually everyone's problems become your problems. Your plate doesn't get smaller, it only gets bigger. At first, it can feel kind of rewarding. Absolutely. You're growing and learning, you're being recognized, and then something shifts, and you realize you've become so damn good at your job that you can almost do it in your sleep. And strangely, instead of feeling confident, you feel restless. Isn't that surprising? I had worked so hard to become good at what I did. I thought, shouldn't mastery then feel satisfying? Sometimes it does for a bit, but sometimes mastery is simply your soul telling you you've learned what you came here to learn. And I think that's where a lot of high achievers get stuck. We've confused competence with calling. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're supposed to spend the next 20 years doing it unless you want to. That realization can be incredibly unsettling because now you're faced with a completely different problem. You've grown into your income and built a lifestyle around it. You've earned the respect that comes with your position, and walking away doesn't feel just scary, it feels irresponsible. And you might start to wonder, is this where the term midlife crisis was born? And perhaps it was, because you start imagining what everyone will think. What happened? Did she get fired? How could he just leave his job like that? We become so concerned about managing other people's perceptions that we stop listening to our own convictions. I remember when I left my corporate gig, I would think through conversations that hadn't even happened yet. Almost, oh, who am I kidding? I did. I rehearsed these conversations that had never happened. I wanted to make sure that people knew I resigned, right? I chose this. I wasn't forced out. Looking back, I can chuckle a little bit about it. But at the time, I was still trying to prove something, still trying to control what everyone else thought of me, still seeking permission to make a decision that only I had to live with. Then another thought shows up. Maybe I just need some more education. Or how about a certification? Maybe I should go back to school. Maybe if I had one more credential, I'd finally have permission then to do something different. Does that sound familiar to you? We convince ourselves that we need another degree when what we really need is the courage to trust ourselves. Here's the hard truth. Most of us aren't afraid of changing careers. We're afraid of changing our identity. We're afraid of disappointing people. We're afraid of wasting the years we've already invested. And maybe the loudest voice is our own because we're afraid that what if this doesn't work? What if I fail? Please don't let me prove everyone right. But let me ask you the same question I had to ask myself. What is it that you're really afraid of? Really, take a minute on that. What are you afraid of? Because if your answer begins with something related to what other people are thinking, then maybe, just maybe, you're still allowing someone else's expectations to write your story. The truth is, deep down, most of us already know what we are drawn toward. We know the work that gives us life. We know the conversations we can't stop having. We know the ideas that keep on showing up. We've just become so damn good at talking ourselves out of them. Not because they aren't possible, because they matter a lot. And the things that matter most are often the things that scare us most, too. This leads me to the third sign. And this one made me smile too when I look back on it because I convinced myself I was just looking for new opportunities. The truth? I wasn't looking for another job. I was looking for another feeling. And those two are very different things. Yes, the third sign showed up in a way that honestly seems almost funny now because I became an expert at scrolling those job boards. LinkedIn, Indeed, recruiters reaching out. I'd click, browse, I'd read job descriptions, and I'd imagine myself somewhere else. Then I'd close the computer or shut her down, whatever the case may be. Have you ever done that? Because you aren't seriously applying, you're just looking. Almost hoping that something jumps off the page and says, "This is it. This is the job you've been looking for." Nothing ever does, though. Do you know why? Because you're not actually looking for another job. You're looking for another feeling. And those are two completely different things. You're not going to find your feelings in that job description. Most people don't wake up one morning wanting a different title. They wake up wanting things like freedom, meaning, creativity, contribution, connection, respect, peace, and purpose. Those aren't job descriptions, my friends. Those are values. And here's what I think so many professionals unintentionally get stuck. We've spent years becoming experts in what we do so naturally. When we start looking for something different, we search for jobs that match our experience. We search by job title or industry. The algorithm tells us people like you apply for these positions, and we think, well, I guess that's what I'm qualified to do. But here's the problem: your resume only tells a story of what you've done, it doesn't tell the story of who you've become. And those aren't always the same person. Maybe 10 years ago, that job fit perfect. Maybe 5 years ago, it still would have challenged you. And maybe it helped shape the leader you are today. But what if you've changed? What if your experiences have changed your values? Shouldn't your future reflect that too? I wish more people gave themselves permission to ask that question. Instead, we stay inside the same lane because it's familiar, safe, expected, and before long, we're interviewing for the same job at a different company, hoping a different logo on the building will somehow create a different life. And sometimes it does, at least for a little while, but many times 6 or 8 months in, that same quiet feeling returns because you didn't actually need a new employer. You needed a new direction. Here's something I'd encourage you to think about this week. The next time you catch yourself browsing jobs, don't immediately ask, what position should I apply for? Instead, ask yourself, what am I actually hoping this job will give me? And write down the first words that come to mind. Maybe it's things like flexibility. Maybe it's appreciation. Maybe creativity or autonomy. Maybe it's just more time with your family or the people you love. Or how about the opportunity to build something truly meaningful? Those words, those are clues. Those aren't just wishes. They're pointing toward your values. And values are much better guides than any job title could ever be. Because once you know what you're looking for, you can stop chasing opportunities that only look good on paper and start recognizing opportunities that actually fit your life. Of course, there's another trap that catches so many of us, especially if you're ambitious, and especially if you've always been the person who works the hardest, does the right thing, and keeps on climbing because somewhere along the way, many of us stopped asking one very important question. And that is what I want to talk about next. The fourth sign is one that I know all too well. You keep chasing the next step, the next promotion, the next title, the next raise, the next opportunity. And on the surface, there's absolutely nothing wrong with ambition. I believe in growing. I believe in challenging yourself, and I believe in becoming a better leader. I spent more than 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder. I enjoyed learning. I loved leading teams and developing people. Those experiences shaped who I am today. So this isn't about saying promotions are bad. It's about asking a different question. Because somewhere along the way, many of us stopped asking, is this where I actually want to go? And instead, we started asking, what's the next step? Those aren't the same question. The first one is intentional, the second, automatic. For so many of us, our careers became a series of logical decisions. This position leads to that position. That promotion opens this door. That title earns this money, and that salary supports a bigger home, a nicer car, more responsibility, expectations, of course, more pressure. And then before long, you're living a life that makes perfect sense on paper, but doesn't make sense in your heart anymore. I know that feeling because I lived with that feeling for a long time. There was a point where I realized I wasn't choosing my direction anymore. I was simply following the path that had been laid out in front of me. It was the expected next step, and expectations can be dangerous, not because they're always wrong, but because we stop questioning them. Here's something that I've learned. Sometimes the plan you made at 25 or 35 doesn't fit the person you've become at 45 or 50. That doesn't mean 25-year-old you was wrong. It just means you've grown. You've experienced life. You've faced hardship. You've gained wisdom. Your priorities have changed. Your definition of success has evolved. And that's what's supposed to happen. Too often, though, we keep living according to an old blueprint. Not because it still fits, but because we're afraid to redraw it. We put a lot of time and energy and effort into that. But I think it's one of the hardest things about adulthood, and that is giving yourself permission to update your life. Because somewhere inside, there's this voice saying, but I've worked so hard to get here. And it's true, you did. Every lesson, every late night, every difficult boss, every challenge, every promotion, none of it was wasted. It all prepared you for who you are becoming. But preparation isn't the destination. Sometimes it's exactly that, preparation. This is one of the biggest lessons that I learned. Success and alignment are not always the same thing. You can be incredibly successful and completely out of alignment. You can have the title, the salary, the office, all the recognition and respect in the world and still quietly wonder, is this really it? That question doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. I think we've been taught to feel guilty for asking that question, as if something, or as if wanting something different somehow means we don't appreciate what we have right now. And I don't believe that. I think gratitude and growth can exist together. You can appreciate where you've been while acknowledging you've outgrown it. Both can be true. Eventually, I stopped asking what's next and I started asking something much harder. Who am I becoming? Because if the person that I'm becoming doesn't fit the life that I'm living, something eventually has to change. Maybe not overnight, maybe not dramatically, but intentionally. That question changed everything for me. Not because I suddenly had all the answers, I didn't, but because I finally started asking questions that pointed me toward alignment instead of simply achievement. And when we ignore these questions for too long, something else begins to happen. It's subtle, it's gradual, and most people around you won't notice it, but you will. One day, you'll look in the mirror and you realize you're becoming someone you don't even recognize anymore. And that's the fifth sign, the quietest one of all. It's also the one that concerns me the most because it doesn't happen overnight. It happens so gradually that you almost don't notice until one day you do. Maybe you've become impatient, not because you're an impatient person, but because you're emotionally exhausted. Maybe you're more cynical than you used to be. The optimism that once defined you has slowly been replaced with frustration. Maybe you're constantly irritated because everything feels like an interruption. Maybe you're disconnected. You show up physically, but mentally, you're somewhere else. You're present, but you're not really engaged. Maybe you've stopped laughing as much. You've become so serious. Everything feels so heavy. Maybe you've noticed yourself saying things like, "Ugh, I just need to get through this week, just this week." And then that turns into, I just need to get through this quarter. And then I just need to make it until retirement. Wow, when did life become something we were trying to survive instead of something we were meant to experience? That question hit me really hard because I realized I wasn't just tired and I wasn't just stressed. I was becoming someone I didn't even recognize, and I didn't really like her. Not because she wasn't capable, she was. And she was responsible, dependable, hardworking, and committed to the end. But somewhere along the way, she had become disconnected from herself, and that's a much, much bigger problem than simply disliking your job. People often ask, what will it cost me if I leave? But we now know the better question. What does it cost me if I stay? Because the greatest cost of staying in the wrong environment isn't your paycheck, your benefits. It isn't even your time. It's slowly losing yourself. One small compromise at a time, one ignored feeling at a time, or one postponed dream at a time until eventually you wake up one morning, you look in that mirror and wonder, when did I become this person? That's not failure. That is awareness. And awareness is a powerful thing because awareness gives you a choice. Now, before anyone misunderstands what I'm saying, this isn't me telling you to quit your job. Please don't hear that. Some of you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Some of you simply need healthier boundaries. Some of you need a different leader. Some of you need a new challenge, or some of you need a better rhythm. And then, yes, some of you may eventually need a completely different direction. But you don't figure that out by making emotional decisions. You figure it out by becoming deeply honest with yourself. And honesty takes courage. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. If you've recognized yourself in one or a few of these five signs, please don't panic. I actually want you to feel encouraged because today you've already taken the hardest step. You've become aware. Awareness isn't failure, it isn't weakness. Awareness isn't something to be ashamed of. Awareness is where freedom really, truly begins. Because once you can finally name what you're feeling, you can begin doing something about it. You can navigate toward a destination. But first, you must recognize where you are. That's true in leadership, it's true in business, relationships, and it is certainly true in life. Which brings us to the question that I think everyone eventually asks. If these are the signs, if this is what misalignment feels like, then how do we actually find our way back? How do we uncover what really matters? And how do we discover our values? Especially if we've spent years living according to everyone else's expectations. And that's what I want to spend the rest of our time talking about. Because I don't think discovering your values starts where most people think it does. And one hike in Florida taught me that lesson in a way that I'll never forget. So, how do you figure out your own values? Honestly, I think asking yourself that simple question is the wrong place to begin because, as I mentioned, you've spent years living according to expectations. You've been meeting deadlines, raising a family, paying bills, doing what everyone expected you to do. You've probably become pretty disconnected from your own inner compass. And when that happens, simply asking you, what are your values, can feel incredibly overwhelming because you don't probably know. You know what your values should be, and it certainly doesn't mean that you don't have them. You know what the values are in the tasks and the works that you've been doing, but your own personal values can feel a little out of touch when you're still in that space. Because you've spent so long responding to life, you've stopped listening to yourself. So don't start with the values. Start with awareness. Start noticing because your body notices before your resume does. Your energy notices before your calendar does. And your curiosity notices before your career changes. Values rarely show up as words. They reveal themselves through patterns. So let me share a story because this is the moment that everything finally clicked for me. A while back, while I was in Florida, I decided to take a long hike, 6 miles, kind of long, on the Cathedral of Palms trail. I'd heard about it online. Pictures looked pretty amazing. People were talking about it. It was a very, very popular destination. One of those true hidden gems that was absolutely worth the hike. So one morning, I headed out on this 6 mile trek. Looking back, I wasn't probably as prepared as I could have been. I don't think I had a water bottle. I took a glance at a trail map app on my phone, which was good. At least I had my phone and it was charged. My shoes were okay. Like a lot of us, though, I figured, I'll be fine. And so I started walking. At first, it was just like any other hike. After a while, though, I started feeling really unsettled and I couldn't explain why. I was just out there by myself. Nothing looked obviously wrong. The trail looked like a trail, though it wasn't clearly marked. Everything appeared fine. Just kept moving forward. Something inside me, though, kept whispering, this doesn't feel quite right. Have you ever had that feeling where nothing is falling apart all around you, nothing is obviously wrong, yet something deep inside you keeps nudging you? At first, I ignored it, and I told myself it was just because the trail was unfamiliar, and I kept walking. Eventually, I came across a few other hikers, and almost instinctively, I found myself watching them and thinking, they've probably done this before, right? They probably know where they're going. So when they turned right, I almost followed, even though I was pretty certain that the trail I needed to be on turned left. I still wasn't convinced, and I started really wondering at this point, how far have I walked already? How far into this 6 miles am I? How will I even know? Am I headed in the right direction? How am I supposed to know? And then it got even deeper because I started wondering, does this Cathedral of Palms even exist anyway? I know it sounds really funny right now, but honestly, I was beginning to doubt the destination more than I doubted my direction. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes when life gets hard, we don't question the path. We question whether the dream was ever real to begin with. Maybe you've done that. You started wondering, maybe meaningful work doesn't really exist, or maybe balance isn't realistic, or maybe purpose is just something people talk about online. Doesn't that sound sad? We stop believing the destination is out there and yet available to us because we've been walking for so long without seeing it. After another mile or so, I finally did something I should have done much sooner. I stopped and I checked the trail app. Really checked it. Not just glanced, and sure enough, I was off course. Not dramatically. I wasn't miles away, though, like a mile and a half. I was kind of close. But a quick backtrack and a course correction got me back on the right path. At times, though, the trail on the app and the path ahead of me didn't match up quite right. It was close, though, close enough that if someone had looked at me from above, they probably would have thought I was exactly where I needed to be, but I really wasn't. That fact hit me later because that's how misalignment often works. You're close enough that everyone assumes you're doing great. Career looks successful, relationships good, calendar full, functioning. But being close to the path doesn't necessarily mean you're actually on it. That thought stuck with me. I kept the trail app running at this point, not because I couldn't hike, but because I needed something reliable to keep me on track. The trail markers weren't always easy to spot. Sometimes I'd go a while without seeing one. So I'd stop every now and then and pull up the app and make a quick tweak and then keep going. No big shifts in direction, just a little nudge of a few degrees was all that it needed. Isn't that true in life too, though? Interesting. Sometimes we think transformation has to be dramatic. Quit your job, sell everything, start over. Except that is kind of what I did. But most often, lasting change begins with small corrections, a conversation, a boundary, a journal entry, a weekend of reflection. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Or even just one very honest decision. Tiny adjustments made consistently can completely change where you end up. And a little further down the trail, I came across a sign pointing toward a natural spring. This was a true hidden gem. It was a spur off the trail, and I thought, well, why not? So I took it. And it was beautiful, you guys. Absolutely beautiful, quiet, peaceful. One of Florida's 1,000 springs, clear and blue and home to a large alligator, actually. I even ran into two other hikers that I'd met earlier, and for a few minutes we stood there together, taking it all in. Honestly, if the hike had ended there, I probably would have been satisfied. In fact, I started wondering if maybe I should end there. Maybe this was the best destination on the trail. Maybe there wasn't actually a really great Cathedral of Palms. Maybe I'd already seen the best part. And I almost took a shortcut that I discovered would lead me back to the trailhead. Almost, you guys. But something inside me wouldn't let me leave. I can't explain it any better than that. My legs simply carried me past the turnaround point. There wasn't a logical reason, just a quiet sense that I needed to keep going. And then, honestly, only a little further down that trail, I stepped into the Cathedral of Palms. I did. It was breathtaking, not because it was flashy, because it felt sacred, peaceful, and still. It felt like I'd arrived exactly where I was supposed to be. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the hike anymore. I was thinking about life because that's what alignment feels like. Doesn't shout, it settles. It's not adrenaline, it's peace. It's that quiet confidence that whispers, this is where you're supposed to be. And honestly, I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to, but I did. The only reason I actually decided I wanted to leave, though, was so I could tell other people about it. And so I could help make the trail a little easier to follow as well. So maybe someone else wouldn't spend so much time wondering if the destination even existed. And that's when it hit me. Maybe that's part of my purpose too, not to tell people where their cathedral is, but to help them find the trail markers that lead to their own. So, how do we actually begin finding our way back? Not back to who we were 20 years ago, back to who we are today. Because here's the truth. You're not the same person you were when you started your career. Life has changed you. Success has changed you. Failure has changed you too. Relationships, loss, leadership has changed you. And you don't need to become someone new. You simply need to reconnect who you've become. One of the biggest lessons that hike taught me was that I wasn't wildly off course. I was only a little off. But over 6 miles, a little off becomes a lot off. And life works the same way. Small compromises made repeatedly lead us somewhere we never intended to go. The good news, the opposite is also true. Small intentional choices made consistently can completely change your future. One conversation, one boundary, 1 hour set aside every week, one journal entry, one courageous decision. Those aren't dramatic, but over time, they change everything. You don't have to know exactly where your Cathedral of the Palms is today. You simply need to start walking in the right direction because direction will always matter more than speed. So here's what I'd love for you to do this week. Find 30 quiet minutes, turn off your phone, grab a journal, sit somewhere peaceful, and ask yourself these 5 questions. Don't rush them, don't overthink them, just answer honestly. When did you feel most energized this week? Not the busiest, the most energized. When did you feel the most drained? What were you doing? Who were you with? And what about that experience took more than it gave? Question 3, what conversation, what work or experience gave you the greatest sense of meaning? Question 4, what did I do simply because I thought I was supposed to, not because I wanted to, not because it aligned with who I'm becoming, but because I felt obligated? And then finally, if success looked like my definition instead of someone else's, what is one thing I would begin changing? Not everything, just one thing. One small adjustment. Remember the trail. I wasn't miles off course. I just needed to make a small correction. Sometimes 1 degree is all it takes. If today's episode resonated with you, I want you to know something. You're not behind, you're not failing, and you're not starting over. You're paying attention, and paying attention changes everything. Because once you recognize where you are, you can choose where you want to go. You don't have to figure out the next 10 years today. You don't even have to have one answer right now. You don't have to know exactly where your own Cathedral of the Palms is. You simply need the courage to take the next right step, to trust your inner compass once more, to make one small adjustment and then another. Because over time, small intentional choices create extraordinary lives. As we've talked about all this month, freedom isn't about escaping your life. It's about becoming fully present in it. Flexibility isn't about having no responsibilities. It's about creating a life that's resilient enough to adapt when life changes. I've learned those lessons through career transitions, through entrepreneurship, caregiving, unexpected hardship, and living life on the road, and through discovering the most meaningful journeys rarely begin with certainty. They begin with curiosity, with honesty, and with the willingness to ask better questions. My hope is that today's conversation encourages you to do just that. Not because you want to make a dramatic change tomorrow, but because I want you to listen to that quiet voice inside you again. It may have been whispering for a very long time. Maybe today you finally heard it. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. If this episode encouraged you, I would love for you to share with a friend, a coworker, or someone who's quietly navigating a season of transition. And if you're enjoying all of these conversations, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to the Savvy Leader podcast, leave a review. It helps more people discover these messages and join our growing community. Until next time, keep recognizing what matters, reorient toward what aligns, intentionally design your next chapter, and keep moving toward your true north. See you next week. Thanks for listening to the Savvy Leader Podcast. If something in this conversation made you think differently, that's the point. Share this episode with someone who needs it and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's next. For more conversations on clarity, alignment, and real leadership, connect with me through the SavvyLivingNetwork.com and join the conversation at the Savvy Leaders Lounge on Substack. Until next time, lead with intention.